People like you shouldn't be anywhere near my daughter. That sentence, cutting, loud, and soaked in arrogance, was the first thing Marshall Grant heard as he stepped inside the upscale restaurant on Michigan Avenue. He hadn't even shrugged off his coat before the words hit him like a slap. He froze. From where he stood, just past the revolving glass doors, Marshall spotted a group of diners. One man standing with his finger pointed, his voice rising above the quiet jazz in the background. In front of him, standing firm despite the chaos, was a young black waitress. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes didn't. She stood protectively in front of a small girl wearing dark glasses, a white cane beside her chair. Marshall's daughter, Clara. The billionaire CEO didn't usually dine early. But today, something pulled him to this place. Maybe fate. Maybe just a missed call. Either way, what he saw next would change everything. The waitress, Amara, lowered herself slowly beside Clara, gently wrapping one arm around her shoulder. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "You are safe. No one's going to hurt you." Clara's hands shook. But she didn't pull away. She leaned in. That moment, so simple yet so powerful, sent something cracking inside Marshall. Not just because Amara dared to speak up in the face of cruelty, but because this stranger had done what no one else had. She saw his daughter not as a burden, not as a responsibility, but as a little girl who deserved protection, respect, and love. And this is how our black story begins. Not with noise, but with quiet strength. Not with revenge, but with resistance. If you think you've heard this story before, you haven't. Because this isn't about race alone. It's about humanity, about what we choose to see, and what we refuse to ignore. If you believe courage looks like this, hit like, follow, and stay with us. What happens next will leave you speechless. Marshall Grant didn't start out as an absent father. In fact, the day Clara was born, he held her in his arms and swore he would never miss a moment. But life has a way of testing promises. Marshall built his tech empire from a single apartment in downtown Chicago. Long nights, risky deals, and a hunger for success drove him through 2 decades of relentless work. By the time he turned 44, he was a billionaire. Front covers, keynote speeches, Forbes lists. People admired him. People feared him. But few knew him. And fewer still knew his daughter. Clara had once been a happy, curious little girl, full of questions and laughter. But 3 years ago, everything changed. A car accident, just 10 minutes from their home, left her blind at the age of 5. The tragedy was swift, cruel, and final. Marshall's wife, Diana, died on impact. Clara survived but never saw light again. Marshall grieved in silence. He didn't cry in public. He didn't miss a meeting. He handled it the way he handled everything, by working harder. He hired the best therapists, the best tutors, the best nannies. He donated millions to pediatric eye research. But what Clara needed was him. And he wasn't there. At the sprawling Lake Forest estate, Clara lived like a porcelain doll, sheltered, quiet, watched over by hired help. Her room was beautiful. Soft carpets, braille books, music systems, and light that poured through floor-to-ceiling windows she couldn't see. But she felt alone. Day after day, she waited for her father to come home early. He rarely did. When they did share a meal, silence filled the space between them. Marshall tried, in his own way. He'd bring her gifts, talking teddy bears, custom-made storybooks. But he never sat down long enough to read one with her. He told himself he was doing it for Clara. Building a legacy, creating a future where she'd never have to worry. But even the wealthiest walls echo when they're built on silence. Marshall hadn't realized it, not really, until the night at the restaurant. Until he saw someone else step in to protect his daughter. Someone who didn't know her, didn't owe her anything, but chose to see her anyway. That was the moment he realized. He had become a stranger in his own child's life. Amara Jones knew how it felt to be invisible. She had grown up in the south side of Chicago, where cracked sidewalks and broken promises lined every block. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Her father left when she was 6. And Amara, even as a child, had understood one thing very clearly. She would have to fight twice as hard for half the chance. From an early age, Amara stood out. She was smart. She read faster than most kids her age. She loved helping younger students in the library and dreamed of becoming a teacher, one who made kids feel safe, heard, seen. She had the heart, the patience, and the drive. But dreams don't always survive the weight of reality. Amara graduated top of her class at a local community college. She applied to teaching programs, aced interviews, but somehow, the job never came. At first, she blamed timing, then the economy. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the glances during interviews. The hesitation when her full name was read. The quick shifts in tone when she walked into a room with her tightly coiled hair and deep brown skin. Eventually, she stopped counting the rejections. Vills don't care about dignity. So Amara took the job at a downtown restaurant. It was meant to be temporary, just until the next opportunity. That was 2 years ago. The uniform didn't fit right, and neither did the stairs. Some customers ignored her completely. Others made her repeat everything twice. A few ticked her with pennies and fake smiles. And every now and then, someone made a comment too loud to be a mistake. Words like unqualified, ghetto, or she must have gotten in on a quota. But Amara stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she was stronger than they knew. She smiled for customers, memorized menus, worked doubles without complaint. And every time a child walked into the restaurant, something inside her softened. She would bend down to their level, speak gently, offer an extra napkin or a kind word. She knew what it was like to grow up feeling less than enough. She vowed no child would feel that way under her watch. And then came Clara. A little girl, blind and quiet, who needed more than a meal. She needed someone to truly see her. And without hesitation, Amara did. It was supposed to be just another Friday night at Lennox & Co., the luxury restaurant nestled in the heart of downtown Chicago. The dining room buzzed with conversation, the scent of rosemary lamb drifting through the air, jazz playing low over the speakers. Amara had just delivered a bottle of sparkling water to a table of executives when she noticed a small figure wandering too close to the kitchen doors. She blinked. At first, she thought the girl was a guest's daughter looking for the restroom. But something felt off. The child moved slowly, arms stretched slightly in front of her, as if feeling the space around her. Then Amara saw the white cane dragging gently along the floor. She dropped the tray without a second thought. "Hey sweetie," Amara said gently, approaching the little girl. "Are you okay? Where's your grown-up?" The girl froze. She clutched a stuffed animal in one hand and turned her head toward the voice. "I can't find my table," she whispered. Amara knelt to her level. "It's all right. You're safe now. I'm Amara. What's your name?" "Clara," she said, barely audible. Amara offered her hand, letting Clara feel her fingers before leading her gently to a quiet corner, away from the foot traffic. She pulled a chair close, poured the girl a glass of water, and sat beside her on the floor. "You don't have to be scared," Amara said. "I'll stay with you until someone comes." But someone else noticed first. A sharply dressed man, red-faced from wine, pointed a finger at Amara. "What is this?" he snapped. "Are they letting just anyone babysit kids now? She shouldn't even be in here." Amara stood slowly. Her voice was calm, but firm. She was alone. "I just wanted to help." The man scoffed. "You? Helping? This is not your place. People like you. People like me care when a child is lost," Amara said, voice steady. At that moment, Marshall Grant entered the restaurant and heard everything. The shouting, the accusation, the defense, and most importantly, the one person who had stepped up for his daughter while everyone else watched. In less than 5 minutes, everything Marshall thought he knew shifted. And nothing would ever be the same. Marshall Grant didn't speak right away. For a man known for commanding boardrooms and out-negotiating Fortune 500 CEOs, He stood there, silent, stunned, and struggling to process what he had just walked into. He looked at Clara first. She was sitting on the floor beside a waitress in a black apron, clinging to her stuffed bear like a life preserver. Her face was turned toward the woman, her small hand resting on Amara's arm as if she had found the only safe place in the entire room. Then Marshall turned to the man who had been shouting. "Did I hear you right?" Marshall asked, his voice calm, but cold enough to silence the table. The man, clearly not recognizing him in the moment, replied with a snort. "If you're management, you need to know your staff is letting." "I'm not management," Marshall interrupted. He stepped forward, adjusting the cuff of his suit jacket. "I'm Marshall Grant. That's my daughter you just verbally assaulted. And the woman you insulted? She protected her. Something you failed to do while flapping your mouth." The air turned thick. The man paled. "Mr. Grant, I didn't mean." Marshall raised a hand. "You said exactly what you meant. And I heard every word." He then looked to Amara. "Miss Jones." "Amara Jones," she answered softly. Marshall offered a small nod. "Thank you, Miss Jones. For stepping in. For staying calm. For doing what no one else in this room thought to do." The restaurant manager hurried over, sweat gathering at his brow. "Mr. Grant, I deeply apologize for this incident. Miss Jones was just, well, we were about to." "You were about to fire her?" Marshall asked bluntly. The manager froze. We were following protocol." Marshall stepped closer. "Here's a new protocol. She stays. In fact, she's done more tonight than most people do in a lifetime. Give her a raise, or give me your resignation." The manager swallowed hard. "Understood." Then Marshall turned back to Amara. "Clara doesn't trust many people. But she trusted you. That's rare. I'd like to offer you something. Not charity, not a favor. But an opportunity. Come work with Clara. As her companion. Her mentor. Her friend." Amara blinked, stunned. "You want me to what?" "I want you to be part of her world," Marshall said. "If you're willing." That night, in the middle of a restaurant built on luxury and status, a billionaire reached past social lines to recognize something far more valuable: human decency. And Amara? She didn't just gain a job. She became someone who could change Clara's life. The Grant estate sat on the edge of Lake Forest, surrounded by iron gates, tall hedges, and silence that money often buys. With its white stone facade, grand pillars, and panoramic glass windows, it looked like the picture of elegance: impressive, pristine, untouchable. But beneath the surface, not everything gleamed. Amara arrived the following Monday morning with her work bag over her shoulder and quiet determination in her heart. Marshall had arranged for her to meet the household staff, and Clara was already asking when Miss Amara would arrive. The child's voice carried a softness it hadn't held in years. Yet as Amara stepped into the grand foyer, her presence shifted the air. It was in the way the butler, Thomas, hesitated before greeting her. The way the housekeeper, Donna, whispered something under her breath as she passed. Even the private chef gave her a tight-lipped smile, then disappeared into the kitchen without a word. No one said anything outright. They never do. But Amara had lived long enough to recognize the signs. She wasn't what they expected. Not here. Not in this house. Not working closely with the only child of a billionaire. Clara, however, didn't hesitate. As soon as she heard Amara's voice, the little girl came down the stairs, her hand gripping the railing, a smile on her face. "You came," she said. "I told you I would," Amara replied, kneeling to hug her. That hug, that innocent gesture, sent another silent wave through the house. Behind closed doors, staff whispered. One even asked Marshall cautiously if it was wise to let someone like Amara have access to Clara's private quarters. He stared at them for a long moment before replying, "Someone like her is exactly who my daughter needs. You're welcome to stay, or go." Marshall wasn't blind. He knew how this world worked. He had walked boardrooms filled with polite racism, smiled through charity events filled with silent judgment. But this was his home. And for the first time in years, he intended to run it by values, not appearances. Amara kept her head high. She helped Clara with breakfast, guided her through music lessons, and read books aloud in voices that made the little girl laugh. And though the mansion remained beautiful on the outside, something far more meaningful had started to shift inside its walls. Acceptance was not immediate. But Amara was not there for acceptance. She was there for Clara. And that was enough. It started with a giggle. A soft, bubbling sound that echoed down the marble hallways of the Grant estate like sunlight breaking through clouds. Marshall, seated in his home office reviewing quarterly reports, looked up. At first, he thought he imagined it. Clara hadn't laughed in years. Not since the accident. Not since the funeral. Not since the lights went out in her world and she retreated into silence. But that sound, fragile, yet unmistakable, came again. Laughter. He stood up, walked slowly down the hall, following the voice he knew better than his own. In the sunroom, Clara sat cross-legged on a plush rug, hands gently tracing the shape of toy animals spread out in front of her. Amara sat beside her, smiling as she imitated the voices of each character with dramatic flair. "This one is a lion," Amara growled, "but he's afraid of butterflies." Clara let out a laugh so pure, it made Marshall freeze in place. He watched from the doorway, unnoticed, as his daughter leaned into Amara's presence. Not guarded, not afraid, but open, trusting, happy. Amara didn't overwhelm her with instruction. She didn't talk down to her. She asked questions like, "What do you think the lion feels?" Or, "Can you describe what you hear outside the window?" With each answer, Clara's voice grew steadier, braver. Later that afternoon, as Marshall joined them for tea, he noticed Clara holding a teacup by herself. "She asked me to teach her how to pour," Amara said casually, watching him with calm eyes. "She said she wanted to feel more grown up." Marshall nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "That's amazing. She's capable of so much more than people give her credit for," Amara added, gently touching Clara's shoulder. That evening, as Clara prepared for bed, she turned toward Amara and said, "Will you come back tomorrow?" "I'll be here," Amara whispered, tucking the blanket around her. Marshall stood at the doorway again, watching the exchange. It wasn't just about teaching anymore. This was connection, healing, a piece of childhood slowly being restored. Later, in the quiet of his study, Marshall sat alone, looking at an old photo of Clara smiling, before the accident. For the first time in years, he wasn't just remembering who she used to be. He was starting to believe in who she could become. The phone rang just past midnight. Marshall had been in his study, going over a report he'd barely read. His thoughts kept drifting back to Clara's laughter earlier that day, the way her tiny hand reached for Amara's without hesitation. It was a small moment, but to him, it felt like a tidal wave breaking through years of emotional distance. Then the call came. He glanced at the screen. No name. No number. Just, unknown caller. He almost ignored it. But something made him answer. A voice came through, low and coded in something colder than anger, entitlement. "Mr. Grant," the man said, calm and calculated. "You don't know me, and that's by design. But I've seen what's happening in your home. And frankly, it's concerning." Marshall's posture straightened. "Who is this? You're letting a waitress, an unvetted, underqualified woman, get too close to your daughter. That kind of exposure. It's reckless." Marshall's eyes narrowed. "You're crossing a line." "I'm protecting your image," the voice replied, tone sharper now. "You built a brand. A legacy. People talk. Marshall. And right now, they're talking about the billionaire who's letting a black woman, some nobody, into his inner circle." Marshall felt his pulse rise. "You don't know her," he said through gritted teeth. "I don't have to," the man said. "The world already made up its mind. And if you're not careful, you'll lose everything trying to prove you're some kind of savior." Then, Just as quickly as it started, the line went dead. Marshall stared at the phone, silence ringing louder than any words could. The next morning, things escalated. Amara's car tires were slashed. On the windshield, in white spray paint, were 3 words, "Know your place." She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch when she told Marshall what had happened. Her voice was steady, but her eyes told the truth. This wasn't the first time. "I've dealt with worse," she said. "But this is different. They're not just coming after me. They're coming for Clara too." Marshall felt something inside him shift again, not guilt this time, but fury. It wasn't just about prejudice anymore. It was about power, about control, about fear disguised as tradition. And he knew in that moment, silence was no longer an option. Not for him. Not for his daughter. Not for Amara. That night, the house was unusually quiet. Not the kind of silence that came from peace, but the kind that settles after a storm, when everyone is holding their breath. Clara had gone to bed early. Marshall stayed downstairs, pacing, unable to shake the words from the anonymous call or the image of Amara standing beside her vandalized car. He found Amara in the library, seated on the edge of the leather couch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. She looked up as he entered, her eyes tired but focused. "You don't have to explain anything," he said gently. "But if you want to talk, I'm here." Amara stared into the mug, then spoke softly. "When I was 11, I won a writing contest at school. They gave me a certificate, a ribbon, and a picture with the principal. I was so proud, I brought it home thinking maybe my dad would finally say he was proud of me too." She paused, her voice catching. But when he saw the picture, he didn't smile. He just looked at me and said, "Don't think being smart will change what you are." Marshall's chest tightened. "I learned that night what it meant to be small in your own home," she continued. "To feel like your voice only mattered when someone else allowed it to." She looked up at him, her gaze steady. "That's why I never shouted back at the man in the restaurant. Because I grew up knowing shouting never changed anything. Actions did." Marshall didn't know what to say. He sat beside her instead. In the dim light, Amara's tone softened. "But Clara's different. She listens. She asks questions. She feels the room before she speaks. I see so much of myself in her, before the world tried to put me in a box." There was a long pause. Then Marshall whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not seeing it sooner. For not seeing either of you." Amara's expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders relaxed. In that shared silence, 2 people scarred by different pasts found something unexpected. Understanding. Not built on pity, but recognition. Not on saving, but standing beside. And without either of them realizing it, Clara had been listening from the top of the stairs. Her world was dark. But that night, she saw something she'd never seen before. She saw love. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. The sky outside was heavy with gray clouds, and the scent of rain drifted through the open windows. Amara was helping Clara organize her audiobooks when the little girl suddenly froze mid-sentence. "Can I ask you something?" Clara whispered. "Of course," Amara replied, crouching beside her. "Why did Mommy's friends say I was broken?" Amara blinked, stunned. "Who said that?" Clara hugged her stuffed bear tightly. "One time, after Mommy died, her friends came to visit. I heard them in the kitchen. They didn't know I was nearby. One of them said, 'Poor thing. That child's broken now. Blind and damaged. No wonder Diana was always so distant.'" Amara felt her breath catch. "And after that," Clara continued, "they never came back. No more visits. No more hugs. Just silence. Like I was a problem they were glad to leave behind." Tears welled in Amara's eyes. She pulled Clara into a gentle embrace. "You are not broken, Clara. You are brave, kind, smart, and stronger than most adults I know." Clara sniffled. Then why do people talk like I can't hear them? Because they don't see the real you, Amara whispered. But I do. And so does your dad. Just then, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Marshall stood at the doorway, frozen, his face pale. He had heard everything. His voice was low, almost trembling. Is that why you stopped speaking so much? Is that why you shut down? Clara nodded slowly. I thought I was too much trouble, she said. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, I'd be easier to love. Marshall knelt beside her, his eyes filled with pain. Oh, baby girl. No one should ever make you feel that way. Least of all the people who were supposed to love you. Amara placed a hand gently on Marshall's back. Children don't hide their feelings without reason, she said softly. They carry what we don't say louder than what we do. Marshall took Clara's hands in his. I failed you, sweetheart. But I'm here now. And I'm never letting you go. Clara leaned into him, whispering, I believe you. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, but inside that room, a storm had finally passed. And healing had begun. Marshall didn't sleep that night. He sat in the den long after the house had gone quiet, the fire burning low, the whiskey in his glass untouched. The words Clara had said, I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, I'd be easier to love, looped through his mind like a broken record. He had built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and outwitted the sharpest minds in business. Yet here he was, a man brought to his knees by the truth of a child. His child. He looked around the house he once thought was perfect. The marble floors. The imported art. The custom lighting. It had all meant nothing when the heart of his home was buried under silence. And then, there was Amara. She hadn't just brought laughter back into Clara's life. She had exposed the rot beneath Marshall's carefully curated image. She had stood her ground through judgment, racism, and veiled threats. Not for money, not for status, but for Clara. The next morning, Marshall made a call. Robert, he said to his attorney. It's time we reevaluate the household staff contracts. Is there an issue? The attorney asked. Yes. The issue is me, Marshall replied. I let people into this home who looked the part but had no heart. That ends today. By noon, 3 staff members had resigned quietly. Those who stayed were reminded of the values Marshall now demanded: respect, dignity, and empathy, or the door. Then he turned to Amara. I know I asked you to be Clara's mentor, he said, standing in the kitchen, hands in his pockets. But I'd like to make this permanent. Not as an employee. As part of our family. Amara froze. What do you mean? I want you to move in. Clara feels safe with you. She smiles with you. You've done more for her in weeks than anyone else has in years. Amara's voice was barely a whisper. Are you sure? Marshall stepped closer. I've never been more certain. Clara, who had been listening from the hallway, ran in and hugged Amara tightly. Does that mean you'll never leave? Amara knelt, her arms wrapping around Clara. I'll be right here. Always. From that moment, something shifted. The house felt warmer. The walls felt softer. The silence, finally, had been replaced with something deeper than sound. Belonging. The days that followed felt like spring arriving early in the Grant household. Mornings began with laughter echoing down the halls. Clara insisted on helping Amara make breakfast, her tiny fingers learning to crack eggs and sprinkle cinnamon with surprising precision. In the evenings, they read books aloud together. And sometimes, Clara would sing, soft, off-key, but full of joy. Marshall watched it all quietly, carrying a weight in his chest he hadn't fully named. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just admiration. It was something deeper. Something growing. One night, after Clara had fallen asleep with her head resting on Amara's lap, Marshall lingered in the hallway, unsure of whether to speak. When their eyes met, he stepped into the room. Can we talk? He asked gently. Amara nodded and followed him into the sunroom, where moonlight filtered through the glass walls. Marshall took a breath. When Harris, my lawyer, first suggested marriage as a legal option to protect custody, I dismissed it immediately. It felt cold, strategic, like turning something real into a transaction. He paused, searching her eyes. But now, I realize it's not a strategy. It's what my heart's been saying all along. Amara's expression shifted, her guard rising slightly. Marshall, I know what you're thinking, he said quickly. That maybe I'm mistaking dependency for love. That you've been here during the hardest part, and I'm just clinging to that comfort. He stepped closer. But it's not comfort I want. It's you. Silence filled the room. You see Clara in ways I never did. You make her believe in herself. And you make me believe in something I thought I lost a long time ago. Hope. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. No diamonds. No flash. Just honesty. I don't want to do this alone anymore. Not parenting. Not life. I don't just want you here. I want you beside me. As my partner. As my wife. Amara's eyes glistened. Her hands trembled slightly. I don't need saving, she said softly. I know, Marshall replied. That's why I love you. Amara took a step forward, her voice steady now. Then yes, she whispered. From upstairs, Clara's sleepy voice broke the silence. Does this mean we're a real family now? Amara smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. Yes, baby. Now we really are. The wedding was small, intentionally so. No media. No headlines. Just a quiet ceremony in the backyard, under the wide oak tree Clara had once called her thinking tree. String lights danced gently in the breeze, and wildflowers lined the aisle in soft blues, yellows, and whites, Clara's favorite colors. Amara wore a simple ivory dress, her natural curls pinned back, her smile soft but radiant. Clara, dressed in a pale yellow sundress, walked beside her, holding her hand as if to guide her, even though she couldn't see the path. Marshall stood waiting beneath the branches, no tuxedo, no speech, just a man choosing love with his whole heart. When the officiant asked, "Do you promise to love, protect, and grow together?" they both answered at the same time. "We do." Clara clapped. "That means we're a forever family now." Everyone laughed. And cried. And somewhere in that backyard, wounds long buried began to heal for good. In the weeks that followed, things shifted, not just within the grand home, but beyond it. Marshall established a foundation in Amara's name, one that offered scholarships to aspiring Black educators and therapists focused on working with children with disabilities. The foundation's tagline? See what others overlook. Clara continued to thrive. She began attending a specialized art and music school, where students learned not by what they could see, but by what they could feel, hear, imagine, and express. One of Clara's paintings, crafted through texture and sound, was featured in a local gallery under a single caption, "I see through love." But perhaps the biggest change was Marshall himself. He no longer measured success by numbers or headlines. He measured it by the sound of Clara's laughter echoing down the halls, by Amara's voice humming in the kitchen, by the peace he felt when walking into a home that finally felt whole. Because in the end, this story wasn't about wealth, or race, or image. It was about the courage to see beyond what the world tells you, to choose love over fear, and to understand that family isn't just blood, it's who stands beside you when the world turns away. So if this story moved you, even a little, take a moment to share it. Leave a comment about someone who changed your life. And don't forget to follow this channel for more real stories that remind us all. Healing is possible. And love always sees.